is pretty hard. So I'm hoping that I have a few chances. I'm probably going to stack 5 different stacks, kind of spread it out a little bit, try to get at least one that finishes high. Um, and it's all about the process. Trust the process. Is a saying that is proven to be true over time. So I'm looking forward to getting you guys' opinions because I might need to call a friend on some of these plays I have.
Oh, it looks like we're on YouTube now. All right. So you're apparently your positive energy, Alex, is what just got us back on YouTube.
Is that a sign? Is that a sign as a Binkin store now?
That's gotta be good juju for you, I would think.
The lights came on right in time.
Yeah. So Alex, now that you're on YouTube, tell the people who are you playing in all of your lineups for the World Championship. Just read them all, one player by player.
Um, I mean, one guy I feel like I need to be talked off of is Patrick Laird. Like, I mean, it started off as a joke, but like, it stopped being a joke when I saw that they're matched up against the Giants. And I actually really like that game for fantasy because Saquon Barkley on the other side. I might not play the two of them together, but he's very intriguing this week. So I'm seeing some guys that haven't been in my lineups in a few weeks kind of popping up. It'll be interesting to see what you guys think.
All right, so we'll talk about that game in a second here, and I cannot believe this, but actually, I actually put that in our run sheet, literally with something asking about Saquon and Patrick Laird, followed up by how is this actually a question? But we'll talk about that in one moment because we want to give a quick shout out to our presenting sponsor here of On the Contrary, and also a lot of our other shows on this YouTube channel of Fantasy Draft. They are the official home of Rake-Free DFS. They also are the home to the largest Rake-Free tournament you will find in the industry, with the Hooters main event is going on right now for the stretch run of the NFL season. So go check them out at FantasyDraft.com right now, the site where all of the contest entry fees go right to the winners. Go to Fantasy Draft and use that promo code AWESOMO for your free 7-day trial. And Alex, we only have a couple of these left in the season. So how much, I guess, pure quantity of wings or pure tonnage of wings, how many wings could you have bought this week with the savings you've had on Fantasy Draft?
Yeah, I mean, the going rate for wings is about $1 per wing at Hooters. So if you're saving the 15% you paid in rake on their main event, that's about $4 per entry or 4 wings. So if you're thinking about $25 entry on a different site, you could get your money's worth the same if you put that $25 on Fantasy Draft and bought 4 wings.
Yep, that is a good amount of wings, I guess. Never enough wings with Fantasy Draft. So again, go over there, save money on Rake, and just play on there. They are one of the better sites, and you are doing yourself a favor by not paying Rake over at FantasyDraft.com. All right, I'll answer that guy in the YouTube chat. But let's talk about our first game here. We kind of hinted at it. Miami at the Giants. So in this game, we have two of the top-owned backs, which are going to be Saquon Barkley and Patrick Laird. Patrick Laird started as a meme by our friend Pete Overzet, an On the Contrary alum. And now he is a play who people are actually going to be playing at decent volume. And as Alex mentioned, there may actually be a pretty good argument to be doing that. So Alex, let's get your thoughts on it first, and then we'll throw it around. But Patrick Laird is a chalk play. Saquon Barkley is a chalk play. Two different price points. Relative to price, which guy do you think looks a little more appealing?
Man, I have to admit, I'm a little bit shocked that Patrick Laird was chalked because earlier in the week I looked and he was like maybe 9%. Now he's at 15% in our ownership projections, which actually you can check out for free today. So you kind of follow along with who's contrary today with us. But he's been getting workhorse kind of volume in Miami, about 70% of the work over Myles Gaskin. Of course, Kalen Balaj is on the IR and Kenyon Drake got traded. So there's only 2 guys left. Patrick Laird is better as a pass catcher than your average running back. And that's nice versus the Giants because they're pretty bad versus the pass.
Yeah, I think that all checks out. Sal, what are you thinking here about Patrick Laird as a play of the week? And who would you prefer out of him and Saquon Barkley in this battle between two highly expected top-owned backs?
Yeah, so the ownership comes in lower now than it originally was on both of them since the last run. So Laird was like 25% owned, now down to 15. I like that a little bit more. And there's no value on the slate at running back at least. So nothing really below 6K even that stands out all that much. So I understand why that ownership is coming in. I'm okay with it at the 15% mark. I would still prefer Saquon even at his 23% ownership. The big thing for Laird is he's staying on the field 80% of the time because he's just a great one pass catcher and they're trailing a lot in these games. But two, he's really good in pass protection. I mean, this guy is just blowing up anything coming his way. He has a lot of size on him. The Giants don't really pressure the quarterback well. and this is a closer game than usual against another bad team for Miami. So he might not be needed as much 80% of the time. So you might actually see snaps drop a little bit. He's still going to be out there a lot, but they did spend a draft pick on Myles Gaskin. So I think this would be a week you get a little bit more of Gaskin, not a good pass protector, but 15% Laird is okay. I'm building my lineups in a somewhat different way. I was under the field on him when he was higher owned earlier, but right now I'm pretty much coming in at that 15%.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, to have a little bit of him in on a projection basis, Alex does have a pretty good projection on him. It does seem a little hard to touch, and I agree with Sal's take about Myles Gaskin maybe needing to get a little more work down the run here. There's really not any reason to just timeshare it up a little bit more to see what both guys have. We kind of have a decent enough read on Laird, and in as much as he's a guy who can catch some passes, but not a very explosive player, not a good yard per carry guy, definitely not somebody who's going to jump off the page. And I think it's time to see what Gaskin has. So a little bit of a risk for Laird. The pass game here, though, could also be appealing. Again, two really bad pass defenses. And we saw Eli Manning have, I guess, a resurgent performance, mostly led on by a couple big plays to Darius Slayton. Alex, the pass game for the Giants or Miami, are any of these jumping out to you at all? Any of these guys looking particularly appealing between Ryan Fitzpatrick and Eli Manning?
I mean, Eli Manning is a classic example of if you just love the guys he's throwing to, maybe you put him in, but he doesn't really contribute a lot of fantasy value himself. But a lot of these guys, since they're going up against Miami, are really going to pop, particularly Saquon, but also at their prices, Darius Slayton, who hasn't seen that much of a rise, Caden Smith, who if I'm correct, I think Evan Ingram and Red Allison are out this week. He's been kind of getting more targets than I thought, and he makes an interesting alternative to some more popular tight ends this week.
Sal, how are you feeling about the pass games here, and which of them would jump out to you a little bit more?
Yeah, so there's just like question marks around Miami right now, seeing what happens with Devontae Parker and Albert Wilson, both in the concussion protocol. They think Parker's going to play, but he still hasn't been cleared. So if he actually plays at 6,400, I do like that price point in the matchup against the Giants. They just did release Janoris Jenkins, who has been playing well as of late. So they have nothing in the secondary. DeAndre Baker, a rookie, has been a bottom 5 cornerback in terms of pass rating against. So if Parker suits up, you get a price discount on him, 6,400. I do like that. If for some reason he doesn't go, you start to get into the Isaiah Fords of the world that's some sort of value. That would be somewhat appealing to me, but really for me, it's just Parker. Slayton on the opposite side, probably underpriced due to the big Monday Night Football game, but a lot of that production came in the first half. Another good matchup. Miami put 2 more of their defensive backs on IR, Ken Webster and Corey Lewis, so they're really banged up. I think Slayton at lower ownership around 10% is okay, and Parker I'll have a lot of interest in, especially if that number doesn't rise right now at 7%.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So yes, I guess to close the loop here on all of these guys, we should talk a little bit about Devontae Parker, who was back in practice in a limited fashion earlier in the week, and then he had the red contact jersey off of him on Friday. I still haven't seen official confirmation of his status, and we don't have him in our projections. But Alex, I guess, do you have a lean on Devontae Parker or Sal? I mean, Sal, I know you follow the injury stuff really closely. Do either of you guys have a lean at all on Devontae Parker and what to expect here?
Yeah, I mean, I just updated him, putting him back in because I saw that full practice. So I was actually really bullish on Isaiah Ford, who actually has been targeted a lot when he's on the field. But with Allen Hurns being the second wide receiver behind Parker, that kind of makes it tough to pick out a second guy beyond Parker.
Sal, do you have any lean here with Parker? And I guess, how would that change your exposure with some of the other guys? Because Isaiah Ford was a guy who really benefited last week when Parker went out, and he is priced really well, projects really well. But if Parker's out there, it certainly changes the equation quite a bit.
Yeah, so if Parker's out, then I would like Ford. He would be an outside receiver. Even if Wilson played, he would still play on the outside. But if I had to lean it, I would say that Parker ends up playing. He still has to get cleared, but if you log a full participation and they let you go on a Friday practice, usually they'll end up clearing you. If not today or overnight by the morning. So I think if he plays, this is a really good spot for him. Again, Janoris Jenkins had been playing well. He's not there anymore. There's not much in this Giants secondary to stop Parker.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, definitely one to watch closely. As Alex mentioned, if he's practicing, so, I mean, it does look like it's a spot where Parker could be back in there, and that definitely changes the equation for one play that would be very appealing and would definitely pop up a lot in optimizers as we go. Let's keep going down the slate here. And guys, hit that like button too if you're watching right now. We appreciate that quite a bit here, especially in the stretch run, trying to keep the energy up, trying to keep the positive energy going. So hit that like button for us because it only helps the picks get more accurate as we go. Got a game with Cleveland at Arizona. And Arizona, for me, using Alex's projections, popped up a lot on the optimizers this morning. Now they also project for decently high ownership as a stack. There's also ownership going to the Cleveland receivers on the other side, but not Baker Mayfield. So Sal, I'll ask you first, who's more appealing to you, Cleveland side or Arizona side, in a situation where it does seem like both will have decent ownership?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's really pieces of each team. So overall for a team, it's probably Cleveland, but a lot of these guys are priced up. There's question marks around Odell's health. And Njoku for the matchup is priced up already. I really do like Landry here and Baker. So in this sort of a spot, I'd be maybe a little more uncharacteristic, but do a 3-man game stack is appealing to me of a Baker, Landry, running it back with a Kirk on the other side. Or if you just flip the script, a Murray, a Kirk, and running it back with Landry is appealing to me. I really don't like the other pieces of the games just for the full-on game stack compared to the other players around them, just projection-wise, like Odell compared to like Keenan Allen's of the world in the same price range. So yeah, I think I like Landry plus Baker, and then on the opposite side of this, I think Murray makes for, just in terms of his price point, what he can do on the ground, a really nice cash game quarterback option. And then when it comes to the tournaments, just a little less correlation, but I think Kirk's still okay. Yeah, the game in general, I think it's a sneaky overall spot. I mean, Arizona ranks last in pass defense, and Cleveland continues to have injuries on their defensive line that they're not getting to the quarterback nearly as much.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's been a lot of times here where I've had quarterbacks against Arizona. Famously, I guess, well, not famously, I don't know. I don't know how famous we were with it for this one, but Jared Goff a couple weeks ago, I was really worried about it. And I took that stand where I just really didn't find it comfortable to go with Goff against Arizona. He still went off because really everybody goes off against Arizona. They are a really, really poorly graded coverage unit by PFF, a 34 grade they're down to now. And if you watch any highlights of any of the games against Arizona the last few weeks, you just see sloppy tackling in each situation. So, Alex, now that I've completely clouded that with my observations, who are you preferring here, Cleveland or Arizona, in a game that, again, two teams with not great defenses?
Well, I think Arizona, it's really hard to get to any individual skill position players. Drake, I feel like, is he's seeing a little bit of a workload reduction to David Johnson and Chase Edmonds as those guys get healthier. And then you got Fitzgerald. He's kind of cheap on some sites, so I could see some shares there. But Kirk is priced a little bit above where I'd like. So I definitely prefer the Cleveland side, where you got Nick Chubb, who's going to be one of the higher projected guys of the week, as well as Landry.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And Chubb also, Chris in the YouTube chat asking no Chubb love. How are you feeling about Chubb? I mean, I guess you're okay with him, but are you concerned at all, or would you mitigate exposure a bit because of Kareem Hunt being in the mix, or would you take on some Hunt if you are playing Chubb? Because it does seem like a situation where Chubb has been losing at least a little bit of carries, enough carries where I think he had a season low in carries last week.
Yeah, he's not really popping when I do like a optimization. Let me just double check this here, but I think that the Kareem Hunt is a pretty big factor, and that's making Chubb not really a workhorse. And there are some really good alternatives at running back, so I don't think Chubb is a mandatory play. But whenever you got a guy who's projected to run 20 times, that can easily break a slate. So I think that Chubb, he's a reasonable contrarian play if he's coming in at low ownership.
Sal, do you have a lean here with Nick Chubb? And would you take on any Kareem Hunt in a spot where he is the pass game back and Arizona gives up a lot to the pass game? So if, let's say, a guy like Odell Beckham fails, maybe we see more work going to Hunt in the flats. Is that something you're interested at all in, Sal?
So at this price point where Hunt's in right now, I'm not getting to any of him. I do think that it's a little bit concerning, his role, but some of it's been skewed. He's not really seeing any red zone work. He had the red zone touchdown last week, but it was after Chubb had like a massive run, comes out for a breather, and Hunt just ends up capitalizing with that carry, giving a rest for Nick Chubb there. So he's really being prioritized, Chubb, in the red zone still, which is a big part of that role. He's the one running back in that 7K loaded range that's just not getting touched, and it's still a good matchup. So he's less than 4% owned. I definitely have interest. I've been trying to just get some of him. I'm not, though, so I'm not going to try and force it in there, but I would like to get more than that when he's not being owned right now. So I'll end up seeing if there's anything to change with projections. But right now I'm not getting any, but I do think that it is a fine contrarian play here in that 7K range where everybody else seems to be picking up ownership.
Yeah, I mean, and under 2% for Hunt, under 4% for Chubb. So these guys are low owned. So if you take your stabs there and one of them pays off, certainly could be a tournament play or one that gives you some leverage in a tournament. But, hard to trust when you have a backfield like that with two guys who can really go off. We'll find out. Let's keep going down the slate here because there are a lot of games that are fantasy relevant this week. And this one feels a little bit under-owned for the recent success these teams have had. But Houston at Tennessee, and that's also got the top combined total of the week. But there's only ownership right now going to DeAndre Hopkins, it looks like, Ryan Tannehill, this is one thing that jumped out to me. 2 out of his last 3 games, he's been over 31 fantasy points. He also has, out of his last 5, I think he's had 3 out of his last 5 over 28. The numbers, the actual attempts aren't there, but his efficiency has been off the chain. Alex, I'll ask you first because I feel like you're pretty good at seeing through these kind of statistical anomalies. Ryan Tannehill now priced up for the success he's had, but is he actually a guy you'd be willing to pay for with his price where it is? And, Houston's defense really not being that great since a lot of the injuries they've had.
Yeah, I mean, over those games that he's played this season, he's averaged 9.8 yards per attempt through the air, which is by far the highest in the league. I mean, that's not a good sign that he'll average 10 yards per attempt, but it is a good sign that he will be above average as a quarterback, which put him in kind of like the 8 category. The trouble with Tannehill, though, is that the guys he's passing to really aren't that concentrated as far as targets. So stacking him up is problematic. But Tannehill is playing exceptionally so far.
Sal, do you have a lean here with Tannehill? Do you have anything to make of the situation where he just keeps going off, but on a pure attempt basis? I mean, his 23 attempts per game, which are mitigated a little bit by having Mariota. He had some bench stints coming in for him. A very low number for a guy who's going to be this highly priced and has had the success.
Yeah, so at the price point, I'm probably not going to get there. And I agree with Alex. There's just not a lot of guys to trust. And the guy in AJ Brown, who you might get 5 targets out of, is now priced up to a spot where it's just not favorable. But yeah, I mean, real life Tannehill, he's just thriving in this system. You have Derrick Henry out there beasting the last month, and any play action pass seems to just be either wide open or a really nice throw from Tannehill. So he's thriving off the play action right now, similar to how Dak was the first month of the year with Zeke. So it's a nice spot in real life, but just at this price point and the stacking options, I'm not interested as much on this side of the game as I am the other. And that's kind of where the conundrum comes in, is like trying to find somebody for a full game stack on the Tennessee side. It becomes difficult, these guys at their price points.
Yeah, it feels a little unsustainable for Tannehill, but I mean, for whatever it's worth, he has been throwing. His average air yards per attempt are 9.2 per target. So he's throwing about what he's getting in terms of yards per attempt. Like, it's not like he's throwing dink and dunk stuff and then, AJ Brown's breaking one. So it is an interesting situation to monitor. And I find it hard to not have a little bit of Tannehill with a pretty high total for him in a game that does seem like it can shoot out. But let's talk about sorry, go ahead.
One tip I want to interject here is that the Tennessee stack is extremely cheap on Yahoo. So if you just really want to get some Tannehill, I'd do him on Yahoo because AJ Brown's only $15 compared to a $10 minimum salary. Corey Davis is only $13. So these are just like the extreme budget options this week.
Yeah, definitely a much higher price on the other sites for AJ Brown in particular, who's had that monster game last week, and that'll catch some eyes. Let's talk Derrick Henry too, because his price is very high too, and he keeps getting there week after week. And this is something, Alex, where I'm curious your thoughts on it, because we've talked about him a lot this year. He's not a PPR guy. He's not going to rack up that 5 catches, 10 catches, those numbers that give you a safe floor like a McCaffrey does. He just keeps getting 100 yards and a touchdown every week. The work is there. They're saving him now in practice. He didn't practice at all this week, but apparently he's good to go. This is part of their maintenance strategy. So how do you handle a guy like Derrick Henry, Alex, knowing that he has this upside week after week? He keeps succeeding when other guys who've been chalky keep failing.
Yeah, I think that in sports we see, I mean, if you just have a random group of guys and you have random sporting events, there's going to be a certain amount that just produce way more than expected. And it's important not to overreact to that. So where Derrick Henry, based on the game log, may look like one of the best in the league. I mean, we see time year in, year out, there's always some guy on a streak that's pretty unsustainable. And usually those are the guys you want to fade in DFS because their price is just high and it really hamstrings the rest of your lineup, even though they're good players.
Sal, do you have any thoughts on Derrick Henry, who, as Alex mentioned, I mean, there are some numbers here that seem unsustainable. 4.2 yards after contact, a lot of the big runs he breaks. It just seems overall like he's due for one of those days where things come down to earth, but maybe not, because it's the end of the year. He's a big dude. Big dudes are hard to tackle and everybody's all banged up.
Yeah, so like the way Tennessee plays is they're just going to keep giving him the ball. That's their best chance of winning a huge game here. Winner takes over the division. But yeah, the price point for DFS reasons, at least on DraftKings, it's just not that appealing right now. Yeah, like you said, not practicing all week. Did leave last week's game because of the hamstring injury, and they said he's going to be good to go. But I mean, it's not encouraging that he doesn't practice all week with a hamstring as a running back either. So there's some more just inherent risk you take on. At that price point, it's just not something I'll get to. I'll probably get to a small amount of it just in terms of having some option if I want to run back some Houston stacks. But there's just not many options on Tennessee in general. So at least that one has some high upside.
So you mentioned Houston stack, Sal. So how are you feeling about the Houston stack? And Hopkins, we mentioned, going to be pretty highly owned. Deshaun Watson, also decent ownership, but not crazy. Seems like the second part of the stack, though, not picking up much ownership for Houston. So would you want to add a second guy to a Houston stack? Would you go with a Will Fuller or a Kenny Stills, who maybe benefits from Fuller being out there? Or would you just want to go away from this spot, or rather not go away from the spot, but rather just focus in on a one-man stack with Hopkins?
Yeah, I think the one-man stacks are fine, but I really like Will Fuller this week as long as he suits up. This Tennessee secondary, they're without Adore Jackson again. They're just a shell of themselves right now. So the secondary on the outsides is going to be a guy named Ty Smith and Tremaine Brock. Tremaine Brock was cut by the Cardinals. He was a slot cornerback. He's always been really a slot cornerback. Now he has to play on the outside. And his problem with going into the slot was he just couldn't keep up on the outside with guys. So now Fuller's out there. It's one of the hardest guys to keep up with in the league. If he's active, he's probably at the ownership he's at right now, like 5%. If it stays there, that'll be one of my just kind of favorite contrarian low end plays on the slate. He's cheap enough at 5,600. You know what you get in Hopkins. It's expensive, but we have some value tight ends now. Some other spots you can get some value. Yeah, I like this Texan stack with Hopkins and Fuller. And at this point, just hoping Fuller's been practicing, just hoping that he actually suits up.
Alex, how are you feeling about the Houston stack? Because the top stacks tool, at least right now, has Houston just a little bit higher or higher probability of being a top stack in their ownership, but not appreciably higher compared to some of the other stacks out there that we'll talk about throughout the show. So where are you landing with Houston, Alex, in terms of a stack potential?
Yeah, sorry about the top stacks. I haven't updated it this week yet. I'm blaming this one on the alcohol. So I'll make sure to do that later today. But I think Houston's going to really pop in the top stacks because one of the factors that I really look for is you have to have an opponent that puts up enough points for you to excel in scoring a lot of touchdowns. And Tennessee right now is projected for 27 points by Vegas. And that gives Houston a huge opportunity with some really talented guys like Hopkins and Fuller to have that kind of necessity to throw the ball. And I think that they're good prices individually as well. So I think I'm going to really have a lot of Watson this week.
Who would be your preferred run back with Tennessee then? Or are you going with the full Tennessee and then parts of Houston? I guess because you mentioned Derrick Henry, a little bit overpriced, AJ Brown, a little bit overpriced on some of the sites. So who would be the guy you'd want to run it back with on Tennessee, if anybody?
I don't always run it back with anyone, but I think that if I was going to pick a guy, maybe I'd pick one of the cheaper guys like Corey Davis or Joni Smith, where not tremendous players, but they could benefit in a shootout.
Got it. All right. That makes sense. Let's keep going down the slate here. Here's a game that I'm intrigued by. So Tampa Bay at Detroit, Sal talked about this a little bit earlier, but Mike Evans is out for the year. Jameis Winston is expected to play despite a broken thumb on his throwing hand. So that's not ideal normally. The question really here for me is how do we handle Tampa Bay? And also I'll posit this other question because we talked about it on the strategy show this week. Lafayette and I did on Wednesday, and Jameis's accuracy on the year, 61%. Perhaps this broken thumb is like the movie Rookie of the Year, where now all of a sudden he's going to be very accurate, able to pinpoint laser passes, no interceptions. Maybe this Jameis version we'll find is even better with a broken thumb. That's what's holding him back. So Alex, indulge me on this theory. Can Jameis's broken thumb be an asset?
Yes. I mean, you got to always roster guys with broken thumbs. I'm surprised they don't intentionally break them to improve performance.
Gardner Minshew did that when he went to Alabama, so he could stay another year.
So I think that Jameis is fine. Mike Evans being out really didn't open up as much as I would have hoped because, Godwin, I think, might get a couple extra targets. Brashad Perryman, he's going to be on the field a lot, but he just has horrible efficiency in his whole career, including this year. And then you got the third, fourth guys like Scotty Miller and Justin Watson, who Miller was injured, but he was ahead of Watson in the pecking order. Now with Miller coming back into the rotation, I'm a little hesitant to try to pick either guy.
All right, Sal, do you have a feeling here on this Tampa Bay pass game? And we talked about a little bit before we came on the air, but how are you feeling about Chris Godwin, Justin Watson, Brashad Perriman, all these guys who could benefit if Jameis is at least, doing what he does and just slinging it around?
Yeah, so I definitely like the matchup against Detroit's secondary here. Godwin picking up the ownership as he probably should. He'll get Justin Coleman for most of it in the slot. I don't think Slay went into the slot a little bit against Keenan Allen, but he usually doesn't go there. So that should be a fine matchup. Coleman's given up second most receptions and yards in the entire league, most touchdowns. So yeah, Godwin at 7,700. I think he's totally fine to prioritize in stacks and even as a one-off. And then, yeah, these individual spots, I don't think Perriman's role, similar to what Alex was saying, he's very inefficient and his role shouldn't change here. He's just that outside speed receiver, probably a couple targets. He's a bubble screen guy and a deep shot guy. So I'm not really interested in him all that much, especially if he's going to get a little more ownership than usual this week because of the injury. Yeah, Watson versus Scotty Miller. Miller is similar, very similar to what Perriman's skill set is. He's a speedster down the field. So if they wanted to go for more of a Mike Evans routes, and this is what they did last week, was Justin Watson just filled those routes, saw all of his targets 8 once Evans was out. If anything, I would take a shot on Watson at 3,700. Definitely a little bit, where his ownership right now is fine. It's easy to get to him and get above the field. But it's not something that I'm prioritizing this week as I probably would have if Devontae Parker missed for the Isaiah Ford situation, because Watson's still going to be behind Chris Godwin by a good amount, maybe even OJ Howard. So I do like Watson at 3,700. It's just not a priority for me.
Yeah, so here's my thing, and I watched a lot of Justin Watson last week because I was talking to these guys before we came on about I had a lot of Mike Evans. Was watching that game. He went out on that touchdown play, not ideal. But Watson looked really fresh out there. He's also been a good preseason guy for I think the last 2 years. A top spark athlete, a guy who actually he projects as a every down receiver more than Scotty Miller does, especially Scotty Miller coming off of a hamstring issue, which is kind of bothering him all year. So I'm intrigued by Justin Watson in the spot. The issue for me is really that Detroit's not a good defense. So normally I would think a good defense would try to stop Chris Godwin. You sell out to stop the guy who you know is a threat. That opens things up more for Watson, for Perriman, for OJ Howard, for all these guys. I don't know that they're actually going to commit or that they can even stop Chris Godwin. They'll send double teams his way. Like they just don't play like a smart NFL defense. So I'm leaning towards still going Godwin. I think I'm just mixing in the wide receivers, twos in that group. But Watson is a guy I'll still be above the field on just because I think the talent's there. I think the potential for him to run a lot of routes. He took over, as Sal mentioned, every single route that Mike Evans had last week. And I think that definitely opens up some opportunity. How about the Detroit side, Alex? Because, these are your Lions, and they have some potential here going against the Tampa Bay defense. You cannot stop anybody with the pass. And for whatever Blau is as a player, he is at least slinging it around out there too. So would you go to any of the pass game here for Detroit now that it's also more consolidated with no Marvin Jones out for the rest of the year?
Well, that's right. Yeah, I think that makes it a little bit more appealing because the guys replacing Marvin Jones really haven't played in the NFL this year very much. They also have Marvin Hall, who would have been that guy on the IR. So I think you're going to see a lot of Amendola here. He's going to really get the bump because he was the third guy that was kept out of a lot of plays. But he should see some more plays, and he's been pretty effective on the field. So I think that the injury to Marvin Jones affects Amendola the most.
Yeah, it's projected to be Chris Lacey out there, who's a guy who I don't think has been targeted at all in the regular season. Had a couple of targets in the preseason, but was not even heavily involved there. But they've talked him up a little bit. Sal, what do you make of this Detroit passing game here? As Alex mentioned, Amendola should see more work. Certainly Kenny Golladay should be in a really good spot here. Projection on him, not that great from Alex, but I think it's an interesting spot. So what are you taking out of this Detroit side, Sal?
Yeah, I mean, with Blau still at quarterback and Golladay price up to 7,200, it's just really hard to want to get to him. Hawkinson out in the middle of the field should help Amendola, and also with no Marvin Jones, just really the only other stable piece of the offense. So, yeah, I kind of echo that. Amendola is the one that seems the most attractive here. He's coming in close to 10% ownership right now. I think he's at 9%. So I don't really like that. I just might avoid this Detroit team as a whole, but Amendola would be the one piece of it. Yeah, Chris Lacey probably to fill in here. Played a little in the preseason, like you said. He got a ton of high praise from just this past week and also in the preseason from Darius Slay, his practice squad prep guy for the past couple of years, but he's done nothing in all of his opportunities, even in the preseason. So I think it's just a clean wash outside of maybe some Amendola. The other thing is Bo Scarborough is questionable, but even if he misses, it's a tough matchup for either McKissick or Ty Johnson, who favorable price points, but probably not a ton of usage overall.
I'll tell you one reason I think that Lacey intrigues you, besides what Sal mentioned about the coaches talking him up. And if you just Google Chris Lacey's name, you'll find a couple of really flattering articles of them saying how they think it's his time to shine and all this stuff. Kind of similar to what happened with Galladay, a different coaching regime, but he was also a guy who they had a little bit lower down the pecking order, and then he kind of got bumped up. But, Blau is going to throw, and Lacey's going to be out there against Tampa Bay, and he's going to be running probably a good amount of routes. I guess, Alex, this might be more of a question for you, but as a minimum price guy in this kind of situation, like how do you account for these guys who are coming into into a rotation of receivers where they haven't gotten a lot of work on the year, but a team has thrown a lot and you're going against a top flight or a bottom tier passing defense? Like, how do you project a guy like Lacy knowing that he's going to be out there, but you just don't know what his target share is going to be and what the looks will be like?
We don't know exactly what will happen, but in DFS we have these minimum salaries, which kind of makes guys like Lacy not that appealing. So I think that we can kind of ignore him unless he really shows that he's an above average guy, because the situation just is pretty close to as bad as you can get with a third string quarterback. I mean, the matchup's fine, but he's behind two other wide receivers, so that might be a little too cute for me.
Okay, I'll take a stab on Lacy just because I do think I am a believer in the theory about these guys being down the depth chart, getting some time to practice with each other. And Blau, a third string guy, Lacy, a lower tier receiver. I do think they might have some sameness in there, but minimum price guy, 1% ownership, certainly not anybody to get crazy about. But I feel like you got to talk about him because he'll be out there in a really interesting spot against Tampa Bay. Another spot here that looks pretty good for two running backs, Seattle at Carolina. Poor run defense for Carolina. Chris Carson going to be seeing the lion's share of the work with Rashad Penny out for the year. On the other side, Christian McCaffrey's prices come down, still getting a ton of targets, not getting the touchdowns the last few weeks. But as we saw in the beginning of the year, that's more of a regression to the mean thing. Doesn't mean he can't get touchdowns in this spot. So Sal, I'll ask you first here, two running backs who are going to be decently owned, prices on the higher end, I would say. Which of these guys do you like more, or do you see lineups with both of them?
Yeah, I probably see lineups with both of them. A lot of these 7K guys, and McCaffrey obviously more expensive. I'm just right now, I'm going to see if I can get anything different on it, but just coming in around just balancing them all out, even the lower owned ones like Zeke around 18, 20% of a lot of these guys. So I'm okay with that. Carson in a fine spot where his ownership is right now. I'm pretty much just matching it. But yeah, Carolina's been bad against the run, 7 more touchdowns allowed than anybody else, second most rushing yards and fantasy points in the league. And you get almost a touchdown favorite for Carson, which historically under Pete Carroll, he'll just run the ball nonstop, no Penny behind him. Carson's been top 5 in just rush attempts since the start of last year. So just sneaky, very consistent usage from this guy. So I like him. And then there's nothing to say bad about McCaffrey on the other side. It's an expensive price tag. I think the one thing is this week we see maybe like 5 or 6 or 7 running backs that I think can score 25 fantasy points at their price point in their matchup because there's no bye weeks. A lot of the times when McCaffrey was like 10-5, there's only like 2 or 3 guys that you can maybe project to get to that range and make him not needed. So there's just more opportunity cost now because of that 7K range. I think he's still fine, but yeah, I think I agree with the lower ownership on him this week.
Alex, how are you feeling about Chris Carson's prospects? I'll say one thing right now, and this is like maybe a little bit contrarian, but maybe not because Carson's ownership is on the upswing. I personally prefer Carson to Saquon Barkley this week. I just feel like we know what we're getting with Carson. We know the workload's there. We know that there's not going to be long Darius Slayton plays taking things off the table. Carson going against a really bad defense. So I'll ask you, I guess, that question: like, do you find Carson to be a viable pivot to Saquon? And also, the question between Carson and McCaffrey. How do you feel about both guys?
Carson's a great play. I think that he's one of the few guys in the NFL where they'll just run him indefinitely, regardless of how many rushing attempts he gets. So I wouldn't be surprised. I haven't projected for 21. I wouldn't be surprised if he got to the high 20s if Seattle is ahead in the game. So that makes him really appealing. Not a guy who's great out of the backfield, but being backed up by CJ Procise, a guy that they don't love playing, I think that is a nice sign. With Penny being out, McCaffrey, one of the highest projected guys for me this week. Or I mean, he's the highest projected every week, pretty much. Matchup versus Seattle, it's just about average, I'd say, and it's just the fact that he gets so many targets that really is the appeal of McCaffrey.
What about the pass game here, Alex? Because DJ Moore has been a guy who I feel like the price has been there. Your projections have been pretty strong with him for the year. The workload's there, and Seattle's pass defense certainly not what it was. Do you feel like there's any hope for DJ Moore or the entire passing attack?
Absolutely. I mean, DJ Moore is having a fantastic season. He's seen his price come up, so he's not a core play this week. Also, Ian Thomas. I mean, we gotta mention he's been pretty good, as everyone knows, because everyone played him. Maybe he doesn't stand out as a top tight end again this week, but he's really cheap, so that makes him pretty appealing.
Sal, do you have any thoughts here with the pass game for Carolina, DJ Moore and Ian Thomas in particular?
Yeah, I really like the spot for both guys and potentially even Curtis Samuel. So Seattle just doesn't pressure the quarterback, and Kyle Allen has actually been relatively good when he doesn't face pressure. Jadeveon Clowney is already ruled out, so another pass rusher out, and Ziggy Ansah, he's potentially going to miss. He's a game time decision. So It's just going to be a better situation. So DJ Moore, he'll probably see Trey Flowers. Not that tough of a matchup for him. He'll avoid Shaq Griffin, who's also questionable, 5th rated Pro Football Focus cornerback. So yeah, DJ Moore, if there's going to be more time for Kyle Allen to stand in the pocket and find DJ Moore in a favorable matchup, I do like that. The problem is just the whole 6K range at wide receiver and even high 5K range is appealing to me. So he's 7% owned, and I would like to get more than that, but there's just so many guys I like down there that it might not fall out that way. But Ian Thomas, there's a real chance if he stays at this ownership, he might be my highest owned tight end at 3,100. His usage last week was insane. I was telling some friends like George Kittle is probably the best game a couple times I've seen his usage, but they had Thomas in motion in the slot out wide. He was all over the place as a wide receiver, and 3,100 if you're going to get a guy running 35 routes as primarily a wide receiver, just kind of hidden as a tight end on DraftKings salaries and the way that they structure it. Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, Ian Thomas ran 43 routes last week, 9 targets on there, 1.3 yards per route. So that would be that put him right in the hunt with all these guys and just behind DJ Moore in terms of opportunity on the team. So hard to not go to Ian Thomas a little bit this week. We did talk about the Seattle side of the passing attack. Alex, Tyler Lockett, is he a guy that you'd be willing to go to at all this week? Now, I mean, nobody's going to be on him. He's had a couple down weeks since he got banged up. Or even DK Metcalf. Do any of these Seattle guys in the pass game look good to you?
I like the spot because I mean Seattle is projected for 27 points, and it will be a little bit contrarian with a lot of people on Carson to go to some of these guys. It is a little bit site specific for me because Lockett's much more expensive on DraftKings than he is on FanDuel. Fantasy Draft, he's also kind of expensive. So for a guy that doesn't get targeted at an elite rate, that makes it a little hard to get to him. So I don't love the prices on Seattle, at least on DraftKings and Fantasy Draft.
All right, let's get through some of these last few games here. And guys, again, hit that like button, please. It helps us out quite a bit if you're watching right now, live or after the fact. We just appreciate it if you hit that like. Helps us keep the lights on the channel. Got the Rams at Dallas. Tyler Higbee going to be getting free reign again with Gerald Everett out once more. He projects as a chalk play this week with his hot run, while Robert Woods and Todd Gurley also look solid and decently owned too. So Sal, I'll ask you first, which options in this game look the most appealing to you with the Rams side picking up ownership and not much expected for Dallas side at all?
Yeah, I think this is one of the games that just like low owned wise, I like as a spot to stack here. So from starting on the Rams side of it, yeah, with no Everett, Higbee becomes another nice play, picking up ownership there, but the price point's low enough that I'll still have some of it. I think I prefer Ian Thomas out of those cheap tight ends, but I do like Higbee. I like Todd Gurley a lot at 6K. I think he's underpriced. You're going to get a nice matchup here for him. Dallas has struggled against versatile running backs. They've given up their top 8 in the league, giving up receptions and receiving yards to running backs. And now they don't have potentially their top 2 starting linebackers this week, which is huge for stopping the run. Sean Lee is going to lean questionable more towards doubtful. And no Van Der Esch, the rookie of the year candidate, defensive rookie of the year candidate last year, he's already ruled out. So really nice spot for Gurley at 6K. Probably my priority from this game at that price point. And then also just Robert Woods from the Rams stands out. I think Kupp's interesting. Terrible usage last week at 29%, but they used 2 tight end sets. So as a slot receiver, he was just the odd man out there. If they get away from that in this game here, he's only 6,500. He hasn't done much of late, but if you wanted a contrarian option that, you know, the ceiling on him, his price point's at the lowest that you've seen in a while, I do think he's interesting, although I still do prefer Woods.
Yeah, it's interesting with that, with what Sal mentioned about Kupp, because his snaps were down quite a bit. His routes run were down quite a bit. And even had Josh Reynolds out there on some of the run plays instead of him because he's a better run blocker than Kupp. So there's some weird things here. And Alex, your projections have kind of accounted for this, where you have Robert Woods projected for a higher projection than Kupp. And, maybe a lot of people have that as well. But how do you account for this with Kupp, a guy who's been looking good in your model all year, and now the offense for the Rams is really meaningfully changed in the last few weeks to try to emphasize the run? What would you do with a guy like Kupp in this situation, Alex?
I mean, I think it puts him into the contrarian status. The thing I'm worried about is that most of the public doesn't know that Kupp has had this role shift. So it won't be accounted for in people's lineups. So that would be a reason you might want to fade Kupp. But and when we're talking about the DFS community, from everything I hear, people are really down on Kupp because of this lack of playing time. And I think it is a big red flag. I mean, he barely played last game, and that makes him pretty hard to love in DFS.
What about Todd Gurley? Is that a guy who would pop up for you? He doesn't have a stellar value projection, but as we've talked about, the run game has been a focus, and as Sal mentioned, Dallas not great versus running back. So how do you feel about Gurley as being a slightly cheaper pivot to those guys in the 7K range, who we've talked about at pretty great length?
I think it's a little site specific. On Fantasy Draft, Gurley is really cheap, so I think he's really appealing, as well as FanDuel. The matchup versus Dallas is certainly not something to get excited about, but what I am excited about with Gurley is the workload has just been going up. So we're seeing more workload close to the 2018 Gurley. The one difference being that they haven't been targeting the running back position nearly as much this year in LA. So that kind of makes him not as exciting as maybe some other guys to pick this week.
Sal, do you have any thoughts on Gurley, given that he is, a decent price point pivot to some of the other higher price guys we talked about?
Yeah, I like him at the price point of 6K on DraftKings. And if you get anywhere around the 20 touches, you can project for him. We saw some just pretty much last year last week proof of concept a little bit with McVay finally saying something, and he stuck to it. 27 touches for Gurley. And then the Dallas defense with their linebackers banged up, it is a little bit more appealing for that. At 6K, I really do like him as a guy who is picking up ownership, surely, but still a spot that instead of having really no value at the running back position, instead of going down to maybe Laird, you can structure in a Todd Gurley into your lineups and maybe a sneaky spot for him.
All right, we got a couple more games to get through here that seem really fantasy relevant. So let's get through them as best we can. Jacksonville at Oakland. This one, I'm really hamstrung by this one because Josh Jacobs may return. Oakland apparently thinks they're still in the playoff hunt. I guess technically they are. They're not really, but they think they are. And this is a really important spot because DeAndre Washington went absolutely insane last week. It was tough to get to because he was a late slate guy. And I think he's a very important play going against Jacksonville's defense, which is just hideous on the year, really one of the worst in the league, giving up touchdowns, giving up 5.2, actually, where are they? Giving up 5.3 yards per rush, my bad, 140 rushing yards a game. So, Alex, how do you handle the situation? Would you plug Jacobs in and then just go down to Washington if Jacobs ends up ruled out, if we don't know? How are you making sure you get some exposure here? Because this seems like a spot where somebody could have a really big day.
Yeah, I guess I haven't been keeping close eye on Jacobs. I saw earlier in the week they're pretty optimistic about the MRIs and stuff. So I think what I would do here is if I really want to target DeAndre Washington in the event Jacobs is out, is when I'm building my lineup. So I'll make sure that I have at least 3 guys in the late games, and then that gives you the flexibility you need that hour and a half before 4 p.m. where you know that Jacobs out or in, that you can kind of maneuver to make the best lineups you can.
Sal, do you have any thoughts here on the running backs for Oakland, for Washington's prospects as a cheap play? I mean, how would you handle this? Because right now he's under 5% owned. Both guys under 5% owned, but this spot just seems like one where every single running back has had production against Jacksonville in the year for the most part.
Yeah, and Jacksonville's defense the last month has just been terrible. It seems like they quit in the second half of games, tons of injuries, Miles Jack on IR now. But yeah, the way that Alex described it is the way that you should do it, and it's the right way to do it. I still don't even know if I'll end up doing that. It's just a lot more work, so probably more lazy for me. But I think the other piece of it is just if you wanted to just gamble on the side of do you think the guy goes or not? Right now I have projected that he will go. All the sentiment is that they say plans to play. So it's pretty much questionable at this point. I think everything is leaning towards a game time decision that says probable. That's the way that I'm sourcing it right now. I'll end up seeing if I try and structure in a way that you kind of hedge yourself a little bit if DeAndre Washington was to go, but I might just end up projecting it as if Jacobs is in. And if that's the case, it doesn't project nicely just because I am sort of in a way limiting his just overall production due to this injury, still giving Washington more than his usual before last week's workload. And at that point, it kind of washes them both. And I think I'm doing that intentionally right now.
Sal, do you have any love for the Jacksonville side? Because we have no DJ Chark out there. He's out this week, and it does look like the ownership is on the rise for Westbrook and Conley in particular. And Fournette's still going to be decently owned. Again, that's 7K price tier on DraftKings. A lot of guys in there. Oakland's defense has been bad. Seems kind of hard to trust Minshew to have the pass game production here. But what would you do with Jacksonville's pass game, Sal?
Yeah, so I think that at Conley's price point, it makes sense the ownership is coming up. If it keeps coming up, though, it's going to get to a point where it's probably too much. But so Conley and GPPs at 3,600, you'll get the targets downfield there, maybe around 7-8 targets for him. So I do like that. He'll face the rookie Trevion Mullen, who has been actually quite good over the last 6 weeks or so. But I think it's still a fine spot because of the price point. Didi's appealing, but more of a secondary interest. That's how a lot of these Jacksonville guys are for me, secondary interest. Fournette, I come in as the lowest owned guy out of those 7K outside of Chubb for me, the 4 7K guys picking up ownership at running back. But even then, I still have around 15% of him. Oakland ranks 19th versus the run. I can still project Fournette for around 20 touches. And honestly, Shark being out might actually just help the stability and a nice target floor for Fournette. 5.5 point underdog is not great. And the way the defense is playing, it doesn't really give you much optimism if the game stays close in the second half. But just the workload Fournette's getting, it makes sense where the ownership's coming in, and I'll probably be right around that.
Alex, how do you feel about the ownership for Jacksonville here? Where, I mean, you talked about it earlier. Oakland is a team who you would think would score some points here with a really bad run defense and a pretty decent commitment to the run. So the Jacksonville receivers or Fournette, do you find this team appealing to stack maybe? Is Minshew underappreciated given that we have ownership for a couple of receivers, but not really for Minshew?
Yeah, I mean, I really like this game for DFS. Shark being out is elevating all these other guys, particularly Conley and Cole, who are just massively underpriced. So I've been looking back at the snap counts, and Jacksonville loves to run out 4 wide receiver sets, but they don't really have 4 wide receivers they've been playing this year that are healthy. So I think that means that we'll see more work for Westbrook, Conley, and Cole. So I think that these guys are all good plays this week as far as points per dollar. And I'm pretty optimistic because Oakland's defense versus pass has been pretty bad this year.
Would you play any Nick O'Leary? Because I'm just looking through the game. I didn't think I was going to ask this question this week, but looking through the numbers from last week, he had 28 routes, 5 targets, and actually was just behind DJ Chark in terms of yards per route run. Would he be a tight end you would consider when we have some other much chalkier tight ends at the same price point, Alex?
So the Nick O'Leary is the guy I think that is kind of playable for sure. Not a guy who has really been excellent this year, only 8 yards per catch. But Chark being out does open up some more targets. So I think he would be a guy that if you really want to go contrarian at tight end, I don't think he's the best option, but he could make your lineup less reproducible.
Yeah, maybe if you have a chalky lineup, you can sprinkle in some Nick O'Leary at his price. But yeah, it just seemed odd to me and jumped out. He did run 28 routes last week, 5 targets on those 28 routes, and 1.1 yards per route run for him. So not bad numbers for Nick O'Leary, kind of surprisingly. All right, last few games here to get through real fast. Philadelphia at Washington. So this one is a really possibly the biggest dumpster fire in terms of injuries. No Nelson Aguilar, no Alshon Jeffrey, no Jordan Howard for Philadelphia. To me, Zach Ertz looks like the best tight end play of the week, and the ownership hasn't gotten there for him in our most recent run. So, Alex, I'll ask you first. Zach Ertz, is he an appealing option, and what are you doing with the pass game here? Because it's a bad Washington defense, and you have cheap guys here to stack them up.
Ertz is a good option for sure. Not my favorite, but I think that with all these wide receivers out, Aguilar, Jeffrey, and of course Deshaun Jackson, who hasn't really played this year, but what we're seeing is Greg Ward and JJ Arcega-Whiteside are seeing massive usage as far as being on the field, but they're not guys that get targeted very much. So that's leading me to think that Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert get a uptick here with Jeffrey out. So that makes them appealing.
And Josh Perkins, too, ran some routes last week because of the wide receiver lack of depth. So maybe somebody to consider. But Sal, how are you feeling about this Philadelphia pass game? Is there anybody that you're particularly in or any of the cheap guys that you would find most compelling?
So I think Greg Ward and maybe like your cash games is somebody you can throw in there just because what he will allow you to open up. I'm not sure how much of a priority that is. It's down the list of wide receivers, even for cash for me. Just the routes that he's running, the AAF wideout alumni, the routes that he's running aren't that great down the field. And I think you might actually see him come off the field a little bit more in terms of if they go into these 2 tight end sets, which they run a lot of. So I think if you got 6-7 targets, a couple of receptions, it's okay for cash if he scores you 8 to 10 points, but the upside just seems capped, especially because of how much they use 2 tight ends. So yeah, that leaves me to really liking Zach Ertz this week. If I was to pay up, I think that he'd be right there as a 1-2 priority with a Darren Waller for paying up. I do like paying down as of right now at tight end, but yeah, Ertz, I mean, you can see a really wide range of targets here, and the low number on that might be somewhere around 7 or 8, with the upside being somewhere around 15, but just really nobody out there in a really nice matchup, like you said, against Washington.
Yeah, Ertz to me is just a guy I feel like they're going to lean on quite a bit. He's had over 10 targets, I believe 3 out of the last 4 games. Been heavily involved. And Greg Ward, I agree. I think he would be the guy to favor here. He had 10 targets last week on 47 routes run compared to 2 targets for JJ Arcega-Whiteside on 51. For whatever reason, Arcega-Whiteside just doesn't get targeted at all, maybe because he doesn't get as much separation. But the running backs here, too, seem relevant because last week Boston Scott went off. Miles Sanders, I think, was taking an IV on the sidelines for a stretch. And Sanders projects really well. Boston Scott doesn't for you, Alex. So Do you find any use at all for Boston Scott? And is Miles Sanders maybe being overlooked this week because he had a down week last week?
I mean, Miles Sanders is a fantastic play in my opinion because uh, he's just been seeing so much of the workload. There are 2 weeks where Boston Scott didn't even play and Jay Ajayi barely played. And that's really buoying my hopes for Sanders because that shows that they really want him out there as a full-time back. Boston Scott was the guy that had the big game last week, and hopefully people fade Sanders because I think the potential is still pretty good there.
Sal, do you have any interest in Sanders this week or Boston Scott, given that Scott was pretty well targeted, but Sanders did run more routes and have more touches overall?
Yeah, so not much interest in Scott. I think just as easily as the usage can stay the same, it can go down. Sanders came out a little bit last week, gave Scott a couple extra touches. But yeah, I mean, Luffy pointed out Scott actually saw the first touch of the game. So there was a concentrated and a conscious effort to get him more involved. So that's concerning, but I don't think it's anything that makes it a 50-50 split. Sanders seems to be healthy. And right now, Pro Football Focus has it as the best run blocking advantage on the slate. Positive 48%, which is one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest I've seen all year. You saw last week just Aaron Jones have a lot of success here. So Sanders maybe not as great of an on-the-ground running back, but this is as good of a matchup as he's going to find. And again, not a ton of value on this slate. So I do think the price point is fine, and I'll still project it for a lot of usage.
Yeah, I think that all checks out. And I guess what we should maybe talk about Washington for 1 second. Terry McLaurin, kind of interesting given what we've seen happen time and time again against Philadelphia's corners. He should be seeing Ronald Darby, which has been a great spot for a lot of guys. Alex, you don't have McLaurin projected too well this week, but do you see yourself getting any McLaurin given that he just has a high upside guy and Haskins is still throwing him even though he's a terrible thrower?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have any interest here because Haskins hasn't shown that he can get it done. And McLaurin's price hasn't fallen that much since the quarterback change. So I don't really see a lot of potential here.
Sal, fast McLaurin thoughts for you?
Yeah, not much interest. Even in spots where they're down by 2 touchdowns, they just don't want Haskins throwing anything more than like 25 to 28 times, and they're just going to run the ball still. So no real interest. The only thing is they only had 4 guys run routes last week, and see four different guys only saw targets. So it's very concentrated, which is good, but I just can't trust Haskins' play right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, the last game I wanted to hit on for sure, because this is a team that Alex mentioned earlier. He's going to give an update to his top stacks tool, but this team has been the highest potential for a top stack all week long. Atlanta going into San Francisco, not a great team total for them, just under 19 implied points. I guess now 18.3 is what I had in my most recent poll. San Francisco projected for a lot more, so they're going to score quite a bit. And Atlanta has passed it, but there is no Calvin Ridley out there. We saw, what is that dude's name? I always forget it. Olamide Zacchaeus, who had the big catch last week, should be running some more routes outside with no Ridley. But Alex, what are you doing here with Atlanta? Because they're popping off the page for you, and they seem to be, at least on the most recent run of the top stacks tool, they have the best potential to be the top stack compared to ownership by a pretty wide margin.
Yeah, I haven't done the top stacks this week yet, so that was last week.
Oh, okay. It said it was updated a day ago.
Okay, my bad. Yeah, it's the wrong timestamp. But I think that Calvin Ridley being out is pretty significant. That's making me optimistic about Julio Jones, even though San Francisco's pass defense is pretty tough. San Francisco does have a few guys out on the defense, so maybe not as good as they have been. But I think that Ridley being out is significant for Gage and Hooper as well. The prices just seem to be a little bit higher than I would have expected.
Sal, do you have a lean here for Atlanta going into what seems like an unwinnable spot? But then again, we did just see New Orleans throw for quite a bit on San Francisco. And we talked about it before the show started, but literally pretty much their entire secondary is out as well as some guys up front.
Yeah, probably their 2 best cornerbacks, Kwan Williams, a slot guy, and then you have Richard Sherman out, and also D Ford, one of their better defensive linemen. So 3 of their best, probably 5 or 6 players out in this one. So not the same San Fran defense, still a fine offensive line and defensive line and crazy secondary, even with those guys out. So yeah, it gives me a lot of interest in Julio. I mean, he's coming in at single-digit ownership. He is just 7% right now and $7,000. So I do like Julio. I think with Kwan Williams out, Russell Gage has a better slot matchup. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Ridley's just target share, but I think a lot of it's just going to force a lot of more balls to Julio here. Hooper kind of gets lost for me in just a ton of really properly priced tight ends that have upside. I'll have some, but not a priority. The big thing for me is going to just end up being Julio on the Atlanta side of this one.
All right. And I guess we should talk real fast about the run game for San Francisco. Raheem Mostert, it seems like they're saying all the things about him becoming the primary back, and results wise, he's been the top back. Alex, how are you handling Mostert this week, given the fact that he's gotten a big workload? And it does seem like they've been committed to giving him more opportunity, but his price has also been on the way up where it goes back the other way. You are screwed pretty heavily.
Yeah, I mean, he's been getting the work, but I feel like it's probably still a hot hand situation where if Coleman or Breida break off some good plays, then they'll see the more work that week. So I'm a little bit less bullish on Mostert, even though he has had a couple weeks where he dominated the snap counts.
And Sal, do you have any lean here for San Francisco's offense? Any interest in Mostert or the pass game for whatever reason?
Yeah, I mean, the pass game, they have the highest implied team total. I understand that, like, it not being a close spread might not make a shootout or anything like that, but I still do think that it'll go right now. Seems like lower owned. So I think, like, the Jimmy G, Kittle, Debo stacks, running it back with the lower owned Julio, the whole thing will be low owned. It's not a priority for me, but just seeing that team total, I think points have to be put up. I'm not as much on Mostert. I think he's priced properly at 5,200. And like you said, even if they want to give him more carries, it's probably still going to hover around 50% of the load just because they are using three guys still, and they still definitely like using Matt Breida, especially in passing situations. So I think it's an interesting, just lower owned stacking spot, but probably not a priority overall.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely one that you could take a few pieces of if you are trying to, like me, make sure to get the running back from that whoever is going to be in there in Oakland against Jacksonville. All right, let's close it out with just real fast, Alex. I know this is your big week, so anybody else we haven't hit on that you might find interesting that you want to bring to the people?
I'll do it in the contrarian section.
Okay, cool. And Sal, any games or anything that you feel like we haven't touched on that maybe are worth a quick 5-second spiel?
So I think Minnesota and the Chargers is interesting. More so pieces in the game than probably the entire game stack. But yeah, I'll also touch on that in the contrarian section.
All right, so let's get to it. So real fast, shout out to Fantasy Draft, of course, FantasyDraft.com, the official home of rake-free DFS. And we appreciate them sponsoring the show. So go check them out, not just for us, but for yourselves. So you can not be paying rake on your DFS site. It's a very important part of maintaining and building bankroll. So go to FantasyDraft.com right now and use that promo code AWESEMO for your free 7-day trial. And also go to awesemo.com/join and check out our packages over there. Alex, do you know if we've switched over the packages to the weekly discount, or is that even, I don't even know why we're doing this yet.
Yeah, I think we don't have the monthly discount right now.
All right.
But with NFL, I mean, there's only a few weeks left, so yeah, if you want to get a weekly membership, if somehow you haven't yet, I always say the best tool you have in DFS is your intuition. Second best by hair is osmo.com because we have so many resources that you can use.
Yeah, go check it out. See what we have offered right now and put into promo code, see if it does anything. I don't know. I think it might be a half off of a week discount now, but I'm not sure if that's transitioned over yet. But go check it out either way. And there is money to be made these last few weeks of the NFL. As we've talked about throughout this hour, a lot of guys coming in. A lot of people don't know who's playing, who's not playing, role changes. So this is a time where you can benefit if you do get that Awesemo Plus membership right now. All right, let's do our contrarian picks. Sal, you are the guest this week. So who would be your contrarian QB pick for weeks 15?
Contrarian, you said QB pick?
Yep, QB.
All right, let me grab this ownership here. So is there a rule to the how owned the player has to be?
Generally shooting for under 5, but if you go a little bit over 5%, it's not, we're not sticklers here. We try to be a welcoming place.
No, I like that. Thank you. I'll go Baker at 3%. I really do like that matchup against Arizona. And maybe not the entire team stack, but a Baker Landry seems appealing right now.
Alex, how about you? Who'd be your contrarian QB?
I'll go with Gardner Minshew. It's a low probability player, but the prices are so good on Chris Conley and Keelan Cole that you can just have a stacked lineup around him.
And I'll go Jameis Winston, who's under 5% right now, because again, the rookie of the year narrative. If you've seen that movie, it's possible that he's just going to be a new man with his broken limb. But more so, I think it's still a nice spot against Detroit, and I think this game has potential to shoot out. So Jameis is my guy. Alex, I'll throw to you first. Contrarian running back pick for week 15. Who would it be?
I'll say Dalvin Cook. I think that Alexander Madison being out is a big bump to him because Amir Abdullah is really not a guy that love rushing the ball. So you could see a lot of rushing attempts for Cook here. Matchup versus the Chargers is not anything to get excited about. Minnesota's not even projected to score that many points this week, but I think the volume's there.
Sal, how about you? Who'd be your contrarian running back?
Yeah, I like the Cook call. I'll stick with Cleveland again. I'll go Nick Chubb at 3.8% right now, 7,900. The forgotten guy right now in that 7K range. I think he's still fine to see around a 20 carry game and all the red zone work. So if you're going to give me him at below 5% with that sort of a massive upside in him, I like that at 7,900.
And I will take the collective Oakland backfield because they are both at 5%, and one of them is going to be good. So play whoever is going to be in there, but it doesn't matter. They're both under 5% right now. Sal, who's your contrarian wide receiver pick?
Yeah, there's a lot of guys that are appealing right now below 5% to me. So I'll say that right now I'll lock in Will Fuller as that type of a guy, right at it, 4.7% currently, 5,600, and we'll get to face just a guy who's been cut and really is a slot wide receiver or slot cornerback in Brock. So I like Will Fuller in that spot, but Adam Thielen, we'll see what happens with him if his ownership moves or not, but he's currently 2%, and I don't know if it'll come up all that much, but those are a couple guys. I'll stick with Fuller though.
All right, Alex, who'd be your contrarian wide receiver for week 15?
I think that oh, man, I'm trying to stall here because I'm still making my decision. So bear with me a little bit. So I'm really honing in on Keelan Cole. He's a little bit above 5%, but I feel like the amount of time he's going to be on the field is going to go up with no Shark, and he doesn't get targeted a lot, but he's pretty good at efficiency, catching more than 70% of his balls this year. And with a massive target like Shark being out, that's going to give some more targets to some other guys.
Yeah, some deep targets also should be available there for him. I'm going to stick to my guns and go Justin Watson. I just think he's going to pick up more of a lion's share than people realize of the work, and scary spot. But, I still think Detroit's a bad defense. And if Watson gets that work, he's an elite athlete who can do some damage. And here's the fun one for this week in particular. Sal, who would be your fade of the week for week 15?
Ooh, fade of the week. I had the tight end ownership up too, but that's also no fun, the tight end ownership. Let me go fade of the week over here. So I'm looking at this right now. I'll probably end up. So are we just saying under the field on or just a full on no ownership on
Yeah,
this?
like you're going significantly under the field on this guy.
Okay, that's fair. I'll probably end up being significantly under the field. While all these guys seem like fine options over here. Christian Kirk at 10.8%. I might end up a good amount under the field. He's moved to the outside, only 15% of his snaps in the slot over the past month. It makes it very good for GPPs because there's just more upside out there, but it also makes it a lot more boomer busty. So at 11%, if it comes up a little bit more even, I'll be even more under the field. So Kirk at 10.8%, I'll probably be under the field on that.
All right, Alex, who would be your fade of the week?
This one is it's pretty tough. I have to admit, I like all these highly projected guys. One guy I feel like I'm not quite as high on. Well, now I'm seeing Darius Slayton jump out at me. He's one of the higher owned wide receivers. I mean, he had a great game on Monday, but one great game doesn't make up for a whole season where he's just kind of okay. So, um, I think that he's pretty safe to fade this week.
Man, I like Slayton a lot. He's had a couple big games. Like it's just whenever, I mean, I don't know. He runs a different route tree, so I think he has more appeal, but that hurts because he was a guy I'm also heavy on. Man. All right. For fade of the week, I'm gonna go to the Giants too. I don't want to, yeah, God. So like Patrick Laird to me is the fade of the week, but I'll go big. Saquon Barkley's my fade of the week. I just think there are ways you can go around it. I don't trust what I've seen this year from the offensive line in particular, but for him as well. And I think Slayton's going to get some looks downfield. I think there are other ways to move the ball for them. So I'll be under the field on Barkley, and we'll see how that works out. All right, Alex, anything you want to say here to close us out? Or I guess we'll open the floor to Sal, but it is your week here. You are in the World Championship. So anything you want to say to the folks before we call it quits?
Just thanks everyone for watching and Fantasy Draft for sponsoring the show. Thanks, Sal. Exciting to do a show with you finally. I appreciate all the content you're putting out there. And I'll just leave everyone with some advice. Don't go out and party too hard tonight because football is actually pretty early in the morning. I've come to learn.
It is, especially on the West Coast, but even in Miami hours, it's early in the morning, anytime in the morning.
That's right.
And Sal, it's your time. You're returning the floor over to you. You have the YouTube channel. You have the Twitter at DFS. So plug whatever you want in the world right now. It's your time to shine.
Yeah, those things are pretty much it. Twitter at DFS, YouTube channel if you want to check it out. I do some fantasy content over there as well, DFS stuff. So you want to support over there. But yeah, I appreciate being on, Alex. Best of luck this weekend. I'll be make sure to tweet out, or maybe I'll reach out to you for some sort of a link to track that. But that'd be cool. So best of luck, man.
Thanks.
Yeah, so good luck to Alex this week. Good luck to all of you in week 15 across the world. We appreciate you guys watching this video. Hit that like button before you go. Thank you to FantasyDraft.com, and watch all the stuff we have coming tomorrow, live before lock. The deeper dive, same thing as always, right before the slate locks. So tune in then because we'll have a lot more news, I'm sure. But we appreciate all you guys. Have a great weekend. Good luck.